The sun rose slowly over the wide, empty plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A cold wind whispered through the tall grass, bending it slightly and carrying with it the smell of earth and wildflowers. On the edge of this vast land stood a small ranch, simple but sturdy, with a few wooden buildings, a corral for the cattle, and a weathered fence marking the boundary of the property. The ranch looked quiet, almost lonely, as if it were a place forgotten by time, but it was home, and for the young rancher who lived there, it was all he had ever known. The rancher had grown up surrounded by these plains, learning the ways of the land from his father. He knew how to care for cattle, mend fences, and find water in places where it seemed impossible. He had always been a quiet person, content with the simple rhythm of farm life. There was no village nearby, no bustling market, no neighbors to drop by for a chat. Just him, the land, and the animals. Yet he never felt lonely because he had learned to find joy in small things. A calf taking its first wobbly steps, the songs of birds at dawn, the sound of the wind passing over the hills. Each morning, he woke before the sun, stretching his stiff muscles from the day before. He would put on worn clothes, sturdy boots, and a hat that had faded from the sun, then step outside into the crisp morning air. His first task was always to check on the cattle. They wandered the fields freely, grazing quietly. Sometimes a calf would wander too close to the fence, or an old cow would stumble slightly, and he would guide them back with gentle words and careful hands. He believed in patience rather than force, and the animals seemed to trust him for it. After tending to the cattle, he would move to the barn, feeding the horses and cleaning the stalls. The horses were his companions. They had no words, but they had understanding. When he brushed their coats, he talked to them softly, telling them about his plans for the day or about the weather outside. Sometimes he would ride one of the horses across the plains, feeling the wind on his face and the earth beneath the hooves. These rides were moments of freedom, rare in a life that required constant work and attention. Despite his hard work, the rancher's life was peaceful. He often spent evenings sitting on the porch, watching the sky turn from orange to deep purple as the sun disappeared behind the distant hills. He had a small garden where he grew vegetables and herbs, which gave him pride and satisfaction. Occasionally, he would catch a rabbit or fish in the small creek nearby, adding something fresh to his simple meals. His kitchen was modest, with only the essentials, but it always smelled of bread baking or stew simmering, filling the house with warmth. There was a rhythm to his life that he had grown to love. He woke, he worked, he ate, and he rested, repeating this cycle day after day. He knew the land better than anyone else, or at least he liked to think so. He knew where the waterholes were hidden in the summer, where the best grazing spots were, and which areas the wolves tended to avoid. He had learned to read the clouds for signs of coming storms and to notice the subtle changes in the wind that hinted at snow. Life on the ranch required patience, skill, and courage, and over the years, he had grown into all three. Yet for all his contentment, there was a quiet longing inside him that he didn't fully understand. He had never known anyone beyond the wandering travelers who occasionally passed through. He had never had a friend his own age, someone to share stories or laughter. Sometimes, when the nights were long and the wind rattled the windows, he felt the weight of solitude. He would sit by the fireplace, staring into the flames, wondering if there were others living lives as simple as his, or if his days would continue in the same quiet pattern forever. One chilly morning, he stepped outside, rubbing his hands together as the cold bit through his thin shirt. Frost clung to the grass, and the breath from his mouth rose in white clouds. The sun had barely begun to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. He could hear the distant call of a hawk, the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush, and the soft crunch of his boots on the frozen earth. Everything seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful, like the world itself was holding its breath. He went about his usual tasks, feeding the horses, checking on the cows, and repairing a section of the fence that had been damaged by the wind the night before. As he worked, he thought about the coming winter. The nights were getting colder, and the snow would soon cover the plains. He had enough firewood for the house and the barn, and the animals had been fed well for the season, but he knew that winter could be harsh and unforgiving. Life out here demanded respect for nature, and the land did not forgive mistakes. By late morning, he paused, leaning against the fence and wiping the sweat from his brow. He looked across the plains where the horizon seemed to stretch endlessly, blending into the pale blue sky. The land was beautiful in its simplicity, but it was also wild and unpredictable. Every season brought its own challenges: Fires in the summer, storms in the fall, freezing nights in the winter. But he had learned to face them all with determination and calm. He knew that no matter how tough life got, he could endure it. Though his life was solitary, he never felt completely alone. The land, the animals, and the sky were companions in their own way. The rustle of the grass in the wind was like a quiet song. The lowing of the cattle was a familiar comfort, and the stars at night told stories that he could almost understand. There was a rhythm and a harmony to it all, and he took comfort in knowing that he was a part of it. As he sat on the porch that evening, sipping a cup of strong coffee, he reflected on his life. He thought about his father, who had passed away several years ago, leaving him the ranch to manage on his own. He remembered the lessons he had learned, the importance of hard work, honesty, and kindness. He remembered how his father had always said that the land would take care of those who respected it. And now, years later, he understood exactly what his father meant. The ranch had provided for him, sheltered him, and given him purpose. Yet despite all the comfort and routine, there was a small part of him that wished for something more. He wondered what it would be like to meet someone who was not from the plains, someone with stories from faraway places. He imagined conversations with travelers, learning about other ways of life and perhaps even helping someone in need. But these thoughts were fleeting, and soon he would return to his chores as the land demanded constant attention. Night fell and the rancher prepared for bed. The wind had grown stronger, carrying a sharper chill, and the stars shone brilliantly above. He made sure the animals were safe and the doors were secure, then settled in by the fireplace. The warmth of the flames was comforting, and he could hear the gentle crackle as the firewood burned. He thought about the day that had passed and the days to come. Life on the ranch was hard, but it was honest and rewarding. He closed his eyes, letting the quiet settle over him, grateful for the land, the animals, and the solitude that allowed him to know himself. Little did he know, his life was about to change. A simple act of kindness, something that seemed small and ordinary, would soon set into motion events that would bring strangers to his land, teach him lessons he had never imagined, and connect him to a world far beyond the plains he had always known. But for now, he remained unaware, wrapped in the comfort of routine and the peace of his quiet, solitary life. The morning was colder than usual, with frost covering the ground like a thin, delicate blanket. The rancher stepped outside, his boots crunching in the frozen grass. He wrapped his coat tightly around himself, though it offered little protection against the sharp wind. The sky was pale and still, and everything seemed quiet except for the distant murmur of the creek. He had started his usual chores, feeding the cattle and checking the fences, when he noticed a figure moving slowly near the edge of his property. At first, he thought it might be a traveler passing by, perhaps seeking shelter from the cold, but as he walked closer, he realized it was a lone native man, wrapped in tattered clothes, shivering from the bitter air. The man's face was pale from the cold, and his breath came out in small clouds that disappeared into the morning mist. He carried nothing but a small bundle, and it was clear he had been walking for a long time. The rancher's first instinct was caution.
He had lived alone for many years, and strangers were rare in these parts.
He hesitated, unsure whether to approach or watch from a distance. But as he looked at the man, he could see that he was not a threat. There was a vulnerability in the way he stood, a quiet weariness that spoke of hardship. The rancher felt a stir of compassion. He remembered the lessons his father had taught him: always help those in need, even if it requires courage and trust. He called out softly, "Hey, are you all right?" The man's eyes flicked toward him, and he nodded, though the gesture was weak. His teeth chattered slightly as he tried to speak. I need warmth," he said in a low, strained voice. "I've been walking all night." The rancher quickly assessed the situation. The man was clearly in danger from the cold. Even a short exposure could be harmful in this weather. Without overthinking, he went back to his house and grabbed his thickest jacket. It was worn but warm, a gift from his father years ago, and it had protected him on many harsh nights. When he returned, the man was crouched on the ground, shivering so badly that he could barely speak. The rancher knelt beside him and offered the jacket. "Here, take this. It will help," he said gently. The man's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment he hesitated. Pride and caution were clear in his expression, but the cold was stronger than either of them. Slowly he accepted the jacket, wrapping it around himself. The warmth seemed to revive him immediately, and he leaned back slightly, closing his eyes as he felt the comfort of something he hadn't had for a long time. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I don't know how to repay you." The rancher shook his head. "No need for that. Just get warm and rest a bit. You've been through a lot." He gestured toward the barn. "You can sit inside for a while. There's firewood and a place to warm up." The man nodded again and followed him, careful not to stumble in his boots that were thin and worn. Inside the barn, the rancher made a small fire in the corner, and the man sat near it, still wrapped in the jacket. The warmth seeped into his frozen body, and color slowly returned to his cheeks. He looked around at the simple surroundings, the hay bales, the tools, and the animals, his eyes filled with a mixture of wonder and gratitude. The rancher brought him a cup of warm water. "Drink this slowly," he said. "You'll feel better soon." The man took the cup with shaking hands, sipping carefully. He looked at the rancher again, studying his features. Why help me?" he asked quietly. "You don't know me," the rancher shrugged. "I know what it's like to need help. And I know what it's like to feel alone. Sometimes helping someone is just the right thing to do, that's all." The man nodded, and for a moment they sat in silence. The crackling fire filled the space, and the wind outside seemed distant. The rancher watched him carefully, making sure he was comfortable and not too weak from the cold. Even though they spoke little, a silent understanding passed between them. One simple act, a jacket given in a moment of need, had created a bond, fragile but real. After some time, the man began to speak more easily, telling the rancher about his journey. He had been traveling across the plains, visiting distant relatives, when a sudden snowstorm had forced him off the main trails. He had lost most of his supplies and had been walking through the night, searching for shelter. His voice was calm but tinged with exhaustion. He spoke carefully, choosing his words with thought and respect. The rancher listened quietly, feeling a mix of curiosity and sympathy. He had never met someone like this before, not in person at least. Stories from travelers sometimes reached his ears, but they were distant tales, often exaggerated. This was real, immediate, and human. The man had faced the cold alone, and the rancher had been the first person to offer help without judgment or hesitation. As the day went on, the rancher prepared a simple meal: bread, some salted meat, and a few vegetables from his garden. They ate together quietly, the man's hands slowly regaining strength. He seemed almost hesitant to ask for more, as if he didn't want to impose. But the rancher insisted, reminding him that there was enough for both of them and that sharing food was a sign of respect and friendship. By afternoon, the man's strength had returned enough that he could walk outside without staggering. The rancher helped him to the edge of the corral, showing him the small herd of cattle and the horses. The man watched quietly, clearly impressed by the rancher's skill and knowledge. You live alone here?" he asked, his voice curious but respectful. "Yes," the rancher replied simply. "It's not easy, but it's my home. I like it this way." The man nodded, understanding more than he said. He looked at the wide plains, the distant hills, and the endless sky, and for a moment he seemed to feel a sense of peace, something he hadn't experienced in days. Evening came, and the temperature dropped quickly. The rancher prepared another fire and made sure the man had a warm blanket. "You should rest now," he said. "Tomorrow you can continue your journey. The weather looks better, but it's still cold." The man paused, looking at him with gratitude in his eyes. I will not forget this. You have shown me kindness when I had none." The rancher smiled quietly. "Kindness is its own reward," he said. He didn't want anything in return. It had never been about repayment. He simply knew that helping someone was the right choice, no matter who they were or where they came from. As the night fell, the man slept near the fire, wrapped in the jacket that had saved him from the cold. The rancher watched over him briefly, then stepped outside to check on the animals one last time. The wind had calmed and the stars were bright above the plains. He felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of connection that had come unexpectedly. The next morning, the man was ready to leave. He thanked the rancher again, this time with a stronger voice, and promised that he would share the story of the rancher's generosity with his people. The rancher waved him off, feeling a mix of curiosity and anticipation about what might come of this encounter. He watched as the man disappeared over the hills, his figure growing smaller against the vast sky. For the rancher, life returned to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. He felt a subtle shift in the air, a sense that the small act of kindness had created ripples beyond the ranch. He couldn't know it yet, but the story of his generosity would travel far, reaching people he had never met, and setting in motion events that would bring the world to his doorstep in ways he could never have imagined. The plains were quiet once more, but the rancher felt a deep satisfaction. He had helped someone in need, and that simple choice had made his life richer, even if only in spirit. He returned to his chores with a light heart, thinking of the man and the journey he would continue. He felt a quiet hope, the kind that comes from knowing that even in a lonely, harsh world, small acts of kindness could create unexpected connections. And so, the day passed, ordinary on the surface but extraordinary in its quiet meaning. The rancher worked, tended the animals, and looked at the horizon with a new sense of awareness. He did not know what the future held, but he understood something important. The world was full of people, stories and moments that could touch his life if he remained open, generous, and courageous. That night, as he sat by the fire, he thought about the man wrapped in his jacket. He felt a deep sense of pride and humility at the same time. The plains were vast and life could be harsh, but kindness, he realized, had a power that even the coldest wind could not diminish. He fell asleep with that thought in his mind, unaware of how soon he would learn just how far the ripples of a single good deed could travel. The morning after the traveler had left, the rancher woke to a silence that felt heavier than usual. The sun had just begun to peek over the hills, casting a pale light across the frost-covered plains. He went through his usual routine, feeding the animals and checking the fences, but something in the air felt different. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He paused at the edge of the corral, scanning the horizon. Nothing moved in the distance, just the familiar shapes of hills and trees. Yet the unease remained. He shook his head and muttered to himself, "I'm imagining things." He had learned over the years that the mind could play tricks when the world was quiet for too long. Still, he couldn't fully dismiss the feeling. As he went about his chores, small things began to unsettle him. The sound of a twig snapping in the distance, the rustle of the grass when no wind blew, the occasional shadow that seemed to move against the light. They all made him pause. He tried to focus on the work at hand, repairing a fence that had been weakened by the winter wind, but his mind kept wandering. He remembered the traveler who had passed through yesterday, and a strange thought crossed his mind. Had the man been alone, or were others nearby? By midday, the unease had grown into a quiet tension. The rancher went to the barn to feed the horses, and as he moved the hay, he noticed tracks in the snow near the edge of the property. They were fresh and unlike the prints of his cattle or horses. They were human footprints, and there were many of them leading toward the fence. His heart quickened, not from fear, but from curiosity. He knelt down to examine them more closely. The prints were large, well-formed, and seemed to belong to several people walking side by side. He stood up and looked across the plains again. There was no sign of movement, but the tracks were undeniable. He felt a mixture of anxiety and wonder. Who could be traveling together in this cold, desolate place, and why had they come so close without him noticing? He considered the traveler from the previous day, and wondered if these tracks were connected. Perhaps the man had companions, a community that cared for him. The thought made him both nervous and intrigued. He returned to his chores, trying to focus on routine, but every sound seemed amplified. The wind, the distant call of a bird, even the creaking of the barn felt significant. By evening, he had finished most of his work, but could not shake the sense that something important was about to happen. He walked to the top of a small rise near his house and scanned the horizon again. The sun was setting, and long shadows stretched across the plains. The light made the world look both familiar and strange. That night, the rancher sat by the fire thinking about the day. He remembered the traveler's words of gratitude and the way he had accepted help without hesitation. There was something pure in the man's demeanor, a respect for kindness that seemed rare in the world. The rancher wondered if the traveler had returned to his people, and if so, how they would hear the story of the jacket. He had given it without expectation, yet now he felt a quiet anticipation, as if the world itself had taken notice of his act. Sleep came fitfully. He kept waking to check the doors and windows, listening for the sounds of movement outside. At one point he thought he heard voices, low and distant, carried on the wind, but when he opened the door to look, there was nothing. Only the wind whispering through the grass and the stars shining coldly above. He returned to bed, feeling a strange mixture of fear and hope. Something was coming, though he did not yet know what. The next morning brought clarity. As he stepped outside, he saw the first signs of a group moving across the plains. At first, they were small and indistinct, but soon he could see figures moving in formation, walking with purpose. His heart pounded. There were more than he could count at first glance, and they were heading straight toward his ranch. He quickly returned inside to gather his thoughts, trying to remain calm. He reminded himself that these people had likely heard of his kindness and were coming with gratitude, but the sheer number of them was intimidating. He stepped back outside, this time more prepared. He greeted them cautiously, raising a hand in peace. The figures slowed as they approached the fence, moving in a disciplined line. As they drew closer, he could see that they were warriors, dressed in traditional clothing and carrying simple weapons. There was no hostility in their movements, only a quiet strength and purpose. He felt a mix of awe and respect for their presence. One of the men stepped forward, and the rancher recognized him instantly. It was the traveler from the previous day, now accompanied by a large group of companions. The traveler approached the fence, smiling with a calm confidence that reassured the rancher. "You helped me," he said simply. "Now my people wish to honor you." The rancher was taken aback. He had not expected anything like this. The gesture seemed almost unbelievable. He opened the gate, allowing the travelers to approach the ranch. They moved with precision, yet there was a quiet warmth in their actions. They respected the land and the rancher's space, and their eyes held a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. Over the next few hours, the rancher observed the warriors as they settled near the fence. They were disciplined and organized, yet their presence was not threatening. They spoke quietly among themselves, occasionally nodding to the rancher or glancing at the animals. It became clear that they had come not to take, but to give. Their purpose was not conquest, but acknowledgement and respect. The rancher felt a profound sense of humility. He had acted out of simple compassion, giving a jacket to a man in need, and now he was witnessing the result of that action in a way he could never have imagined. The group's presence was overwhelming in number, yet gentle in demeanor. He realized that the world was larger than his ranch, and that kindness could travel further than he had ever thought possible. Throughout the day, he interacted with the traveler, learning about the community he belonged to. They were a people of honor, bound by tradition and mutual respect. They had heard of his generosity through the traveler's words and had decided to come and show their gratitude. The rancher was amazed by their dedication and the care with which they approached the situation. It was clear that they valued human connection and the integrity of actions above all else. The warriors brought gifts, small tokens of their culture, crafted with skill and care. The rancher accepted them humbly, realizing that these items represented more than material value. They were symbols of respect, trust, and shared humanity. He felt a deep connection to these people, strangers though they were, because they recognized the simple truth that kindness mattered. As the sun set, the rancher sat on the porch once more, watching the warriors line up near the fence. There was a quiet power in their presence, a strength that came not from force but from unity and purpose. The traveler approached him again, offering a final word of gratitude. "Your actions have not gone unnoticed," he said. "You have shown that the heart matters, and that has brought us here. Remember, even small gestures can create great ripples." The rancher felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. He realized that the world was interconnected in ways he had never fully understood. His small life on the ranch, once isolated and quiet, had now intersected with a larger story, one that he had only glimpsed through a single act of generosity. He understood that every choice, no matter how small, had consequences beyond what he could see. That night, the rancher reflected on the events of the day. The wind had calmed, and the stars shone brightly above the plains. He felt a quiet satisfaction and a profound sense of purpose. The presence of the warriors, their respect and their gratitude reminded him that even in a lonely, harsh world, human connection was possible. It could arrive in unexpected ways, turning ordinary moments into extraordinary experiences. He lay in bed, listening to the soft sounds of the night, thinking about the traveler, the warriors, and the journey that had brought them to his fence. He understood now that life was not just about survival, chores, or routine. It was about the choices one made, the compassion one showed, and the relationships one nurtured. Even a small gesture, like giving a jacket to someone in need, could change the course of events in ways that were impossible to predict. Sleep came slowly that night, but it was deep and restorative. The rancher dreamed not of isolation, but of connection, of people reaching across distances, and of the unexpected power of kindness. When he awoke the next morning, the plains looked the same, quiet and vast, yet everything had changed. He had learned that life was larger than the boundaries of his ranch, and that courage, compassion, and generosity could bring the world to his doorstep in ways he had never imagined. The morning light spilled over the plains, painting everything in shades of gold. The rancher stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the crisp, cold air. The herd moved quietly in the corral, and the horses nickered softly. But his attention was not on them. Overnight, more figures had appeared near the fence. The warriors from yesterday had not left. In fact, there were more now, standing in formation, calm and respectful, their eyes fixed on the rancher and the land he tended so carefully. He felt a mix of awe and nervousness. The number of people had grown considerably. What had started as one traveler had turned into a large, disciplined group, each member carrying themselves with quiet confidence. He could see the sunlight glinting off simple decorations on their clothing, handcrafted pieces that told stories of their people, their traditions, and their history. Despite the imposing number, there was no threat in their presence, only purpose. The traveler who had first appeared stepped forward, moving gracefully through the crowd. He stopped at the gate and looked at the rancher, his expression calm but full of respect. "You helped me when I needed it most," he said. "Now my people wish to honor you and show their gratitude." The rancher swallowed hard, humbled by the words. He had acted out of simple kindness, expecting nothing in return. He had never imagined that this small gesture would bring so many people to his land. He nodded, opening the gate wider, inviting them closer. The warriors began to approach, their movements deliberate and measured, showing respect for the space and the land. As they came nearer, the rancher noticed the care they took in every action. No one stepped on the garden he had tended for weeks. They avoided startling the animals, speaking in low tones to one another, ensuring that every step honored the home they had entered. It was a remarkable sight, the kind of discipline and respect he had never seen outside his own work. Even in the presence of so many strangers, the calm in their manner gave him reassurance. One by one, the warriors began to offer small gifts. Each item was crafted with care: a woven basket, a carved wooden figurine, a necklace made from beads and stones. The rancher accepted them with gratitude, careful to handle each gift respectfully. He could see the thought and effort that had gone into every piece. These were not simply tokens. They were expressions of appreciation, proof of the value they placed on kindness and honor. The traveler stepped closer, placing a hand on the rancher's shoulder. "Your jacket saved my life," he said. "It was more than warmth. It was hope. You acted without question or hesitation, and that is a rare thing. My people have come to show that such acts are never forgotten." The rancher felt his chest tighten with emotion. He had never been recognized in such a way, not for any act he had done. He had simply followed what felt right, helping someone in need because it was the humane thing to do. And yet, here were hundreds of people acknowledging and honoring him. It was overwhelming, humbling, and profoundly moving all at once. The warriors then formed a circle near the fence, leaving a space between themselves and the rancher. It was a gesture of respect, ensuring that he did not feel crowded or threatened. The traveler motioned for him to step forward, and he did, unsure what would happen next. The entire group watched silently, their eyes attentive and focused, waiting for something he could not yet understand. Then, one by one, they began to speak words of gratitude, not all directed at him personally, but for the principle he had shown: compassion, courage, and respect for life. Each statement, though simple, carried weight. They spoke of the importance of helping those in need, of the strength found in generosity, and the way kindness could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond what anyone could see. The rancher listened, struck by the clarity of their message. He had always believed in the goodness of small actions, but seeing it reflected in this community of people gave it new meaning. It was no longer just a belief. It was a living truth, demonstrated in the careful, intentional presence of these warriors. They had come not for recognition, not for power, but to honor a single act of humanity. As the day progressed, the rancher learned more about their culture, their traditions, and the ways in which they valued honor and respect. They spoke of community, of the bonds between people, and the importance of remembering those who act selflessly. He realized that their visit was more than gratitude. It was a lesson in human connection, a reminder that actions, no matter how small, could create profound consequences. The travelers shared stories of their lives, of challenges faced in harsh environments, of journeys across wide plains and forests, of moments where trust and courage had changed outcomes. The rancher listened intently, absorbing each tale, marveling at the similarities between their lives and his own, even across the divide of culture and experience. They all faced struggles, relied on the land, and understood the value of respect and integrity. He also learned that the traveler had spoken highly of him to the group before their arrival. They had come not on impulse but with intention, to honor the rancher in a way that reflected their values. They had witnessed kindness and wanted to celebrate it, not in words alone, but through their actions, presence, and the offerings they brought. It was a powerful demonstration of gratitude, unlike anything the rancher had ever experienced. By late afternoon, the interaction had grown more relaxed. Some warriors began to help with chores, checking the fences and offering assistance with feeding the animals. Their actions were deliberate, showing respect for the land and the rancher's way of life. It was not work imposed upon them, but participation in a shared experience, a way to honor him through action rather than words alone. The rancher found himself laughing softly as he watched a few of them struggle to understand the routines of cattle feeding. Their attempts were careful but awkward, yet he appreciated their effort and patience. In return, he showed them the best methods he used, demonstrating care and trust. Through these moments, a deeper connection formed, built on shared work, mutual respect, and genuine human interaction. Evening approached, and the sky turned shades of orange and purple. The warriors gathered again near the fence, forming a semicircle. The traveler stepped forward and spoke once more. "We will not stay long, but we wanted you to understand the depth of our gratitude. Your heart, your action, has shown us that there are people in this world who live by principle and courage. That is worth honoring." The rancher felt his throat tighten with emotion. He had not asked for recognition, had not expected it, yet he understood now that his choice had meaning far beyond what he could have imagined. The act of giving a jacket to someone in need had created a bridge, connecting him to people, culture, and values that were new yet profoundly resonant. Before departing, the warriors presented a final offering, a handcrafted item of great significance within their culture. It was a symbol of respect, trust, and acknowledgement of the rancher's generosity. He accepted it with both hands, understanding that it was more than a gift. It was a connection, a bond that transcended distance and language. As they prepared to leave, the traveler paused and looked at the rancher. "Remember," he said quietly, "even the smallest act of kindness can change lives. Today we honor you not just for what you did, but for what it represents, the courage to care, the wisdom to act, and the strength to trust in goodness." The rancher watched as the group moved back across the plains, their disciplined formation slowly disappearing into the distance. The wind carried faint echoes of their presence, the rustle of clothing and the quiet murmur of voices. Though they had left, the rancher felt that something profound had settled into the land, into his heart, and into the rhythm of his life. He returned to his chores with a light step, a new awareness in his movements. Each action, no matter how ordinary, felt infused with significance. He fed the cattle, checked the fences, and tended the garden with renewed purpose. The plains seemed more alive, the wind more welcoming, and the sky more vivid. The encounter had transformed the familiar into something extraordinary. That night, as he sat by the fire, he reflected on the day's events. The warmth of the flames contrasted with the cold outside, but even more important was the warmth in his heart. He realized that the world was interconnected in ways he had never fully appreciated. Acts of kindness traveled farther than one could see, creating bonds and ripples that might last for years. He understood, too, that generosity was not about recognition or reward. It was about action, principle, and the willingness to trust in humanity. The jacket he had given was a simple thing, yet it had carried the power to connect people, cultures, and hearts. The rancher felt humbled, grateful, and inspired by what he had witnessed. As the stars appeared above the plains, he felt a quiet hope for the future. Life on the ranch would continue, with its daily chores, its challenges, and its solitude. But now he carried with him a sense of purpose and connection, a knowledge that even in the most remote corners of the world, compassion could bring people together in ways that were beautiful and lasting. He went to bed that night with a calm heart. The plains were silent, but the memory of the warriors, their discipline, their gifts, and their gratitude filled the space around him. He knew that life had changed, subtly but profoundly, and that he had been part of something extraordinary, simply by choosing to help another human being. The next morning, the rancher woke to a quiet that felt familiar yet different. The wind had calmed and the plains stretched endlessly under a pale sun. The previous day's events still lingered in his mind, and he felt a sense of wonder that was hard to describe. The warriors had left, but their presence remained in memory, in the careful way they had moved through his land, in the gifts they had offered, and in the respect they had shown. It was as if the plains themselves had absorbed the energy of their gratitude, leaving something lasting behind. He went about his morning chores with a sense of calm and purpose. Feeding the cattle, brushing the horses, and checking the fences no longer felt like simple routine. Every action was now infused with meaning. The world, which had once seemed vast, quiet, and lonely, now felt connected. The rancher realized that his small life, lived in solitude, had touched the lives of others, and in turn, theirs had touched his. Later in the morning, as he worked in the garden, he noticed a small figure approaching across the frost-covered ground. It was the traveler, returning briefly to speak with him one more time before continuing his journey. The rancher waved, and the traveler smiled warmly. There was a quiet understanding in his eyes, a knowledge that their connection was deeper than words. "You have changed more than you know," the traveler said. "Not just me, but many others. The story of your kindness will be remembered, and it will inspire. You see, small acts carry great power even when you do not notice them." The rancher nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "I didn't do it for recognition, I just did what I thought was right," he said softly. The traveler's gaze was steady. "And that is why it matters. True kindness asks nothing in return, yet it creates bonds stronger than any obligation. You opened your heart, and in doing so, you have opened the door for understanding, respect, and friendship." The traveler lingered for a few more moments, exchanging words that seemed simple but carried profound meaning. He spoke of journeys ahead, of lessons to be shared, and of the importance of remembering that every action has consequences, often far beyond what one can see. Then, with a final nod of respect, he turned and disappeared once more over the hills, leaving the rancher standing quietly, absorbing the weight of his words.